Okay, hello. Today is November 21st, 2021, and we'll make a presentation now on Terunobu Fujimori, Japanese architect whose birthday is today, November 21st. So Terunobu Fujimori, born, as we see, November 21st, 1946. So he's 71, no, what am I saying? 81 years old today. He's a Japanese architect and architectural historian. During the 1970s and 1980s, he made studies of the city about early Western buildings and unusual occurrences, and did not turn to architecture until he was in his 40s. His work is considered by many to be eccentric, but is characterized by his use of natural materials. Although he is well known in Japan as a cultural commentator, he was not widely known in the West until he represented Japan at the 2006 Venice Biennial. Okay, so let's see. Indeed, he is unusual, and his architecture could very well be considered, as we just read, eccentric. This is the man. So happy birthday to you, sir. He's 81 years old today. Here he is in a space which most of us would totally reject as being totally inappropriate, being the ceiling unacceptably low and the surface area of the space also unacceptably small. But maybe we should consider, what our true needs are, and if he can enjoy himself there in that little corner, maybe we could too. Why not? Anyway, also considering the problems we are facing today, climate change, ecological problems, sustainability, the rising levels of the seas, the melting of the icebergs, pollution, and so on. Perhaps small spaces would be some kind of a tempting a solution, because in many ways we did provoke nature to dramatically through our assault on nature. And small things can indeed be beautiful, as the title of the book is, Small is Beautiful. Here he is again, I believe there is some wisdom in his so-called eccentricities. After all, do we need so much in order to be happy, or in order to feel accomplished, or in order to, enjoy the poetry of life? Perhaps not. Some drawings. He draws a lot manually, which is not so much the fashion any longer because of the technologies we have at our disposal. Books are published with his drawings. Now you see, this drawing is whimsical, so to speak, and to say the least. And what is even more, he builds buildings like this. It's not that he just draws them. He actually builds them, and you are going to see some of them. What architect today would build such fairy tale, extravagant little structures? Not many, It's true. Here we have a total rejection of the rationalist dogmas and rationalist approaches to architecture that manual like Ernest Neufert would tempt us towards. This is an architecture, a dreamy architecture, and it's infantile somehow. But there are suggestions here for a different kind of approach to architecture. the so-called civilized society, ran away from such, modest visions. You'd almost say this is not an educated architect. This is an amateur architect. This is this is a type of architecture that is not possible today. Well, in a very, very sophisticated country like Japan, it seems that a sophisticated architect and historian like him, he's able to build like this. Here is a chapel for the Venice Biennial, which was built. Now, if you would make such a project in a university or in an architecture school, you would be considered naive and childlike and, regressed or whatever. But as you can see, this was the drawing that, was at the base of, a building that was built for the Venice Biennial, the architectural avant-garde movement that manifests itself every 2 years. This is a building he built. Now, of course, the functionalist would ask, well, how can you bring the piano in? Well, how many people have pianos in their homes? And okay, this is not a building to build the piano, to bring the piano in. It's okay. Do we have to have every single building or every single apartment with a piano in? I don't think so. Anyway, also the functionalist would protest against the ladder, the stair. Well, how could one go through this? Well, apparently some more slim people can. And, it's a very unusual kind of architecture, but it is built. Now, let's look at some buildings by him. The Shinjokan, unfortunately, I do not know very well how to pronounce this, Moriya Historical Museum from 1991 in Chino, Nagano. This is one of the least extravagant structures that he built. And it's also kind of interesting because today is also the birthday of an important Belgian surrealist painter, Rene Magritte. And I would say that this Japanese architect also builds an architecture which in some respects has some surrealist traits. After I present his work, I will make a presentation about architecture and surrealism by the way of the birth of Rene Magritte. This is in a way an atemporal architecture because it's not influenced by, it is influenced in a way by certain historical, past, buildings, but at the same time, it's rather naive, and because of it, usually history manifests itself in a oppressively scholastic way, but in this case, it's not so. There is some kind of a rurality also, but it's a mixture of things. It's kind of an interesting approach to architecture, although it's hard to totally accept it because, how do you marry this, for example, with nuclear energy or with the incredible technology that exists right in Japan? It's some kind of a reaction, or is it some kind of a, complementary activity, or what is it? How could we build in this way today? A house from 1995 in a region of Tokyo. This one is more elaborate in the sense that, it has a certain centrality and symmetry, the regular rhythm of the windows, but it's still unusual because of the way he inserts, small portions of green here. And this one is a little more cultured, so to speak, but it's still a building that would surprise one. Domestic architecture can be done in this way, but very rarely is. Look at the top, look at the roof, how it is done. And what are these things emerging, these sticks coming out of the roof? One thing is for sure, this Japanese architect is promoting smallness. Even though he built some larger buildings, and I think it's important to understand that smallness could indeed be some kind of a reaction to globalist architecture, which is bigger and bigger and more emphatic, and so on. Let's see. I want to move forward, and for some reason it's not allowing me to. Nira House from 1997. Too Low Tea House. In a gentle way, he is actually very, very radical, because this kind of architecture is everything we do not do. I mean, look at the size. I mean, here you have the head of someone. These are, what is this? Sorry, somebody is Yakisuji house. This is also an interesting house, but look at this cantilever part, which is strange, to say the least. It's really an infantile architecture. And what is funny is that this is actually a very cultured man who promotes this kind of architecture. Look at this ladder here, how strange it is, I mean, you would expect something like this in an uneducated environment, in a, let's say, remote village or something. Well, no, this is architecture done by a very cultured man, very educated man, in the context of a sophisticated, hyper-industrial, hyper-technological Japan. But I have all the respect for a country like Japan, which welcomes even this kind of architecture. This only shows how open-minded they are, and practically you can do anything in Japan. All the dogmas that architecture schools teach are literally dogmas, because, again, you will never see something like this in a Neufert manual, never. But in old architecture, in many parts of the world, this was a common occurrence. It happened, to go up to the attic, or even to go to an alcove, or to a, it's very possible. Why, again, do we have to have majestic stairs using the formula, how to calculate the height of the steps and so on? Why? Look at the window, I mean, who'd do such a window today? Not too many people, but I think in its own naive way, it's delicious. It's a delicious little window. My grandmother had a similar window in an old village near Sibiu in Transylvania, which I enjoyed to look through when she was preparing the meal and I was waiting in a very pleasant environment. Anyway, so again and again, architecture should be free of dogmas and restrictions and, allow life to manifest itself with all its, capriciousness sometimes. Sujiban, let's read about this because it's very interesting about a technique he uses in many of his buildings. I don't know if I pronounce well, Yakisuji or burnt cedar. Burnt cedar is a traditional Japanese method to burn the surface of cedar timber to give it a unique rustic look. It also enhances timber's functionality by oxidizing the surface. Sujiban is a lot more resistant to fire, water, weathering, and insects compared to untreated wood. It is believed that Sujiban lasts as long as 70 or 80 years, since it does not require chemical coatings and leverages the beauty of natural cycle. It is drawing increasing attention as natural and sustainable solution. And here it is this burnt wood that he uses a method employed in older times. And even aesthetically, I would say this patina of the wood is not to be disconsidered. And if it lasts for so long, 70, 80 years, and if it doesn't need chemical treatment, all for the better. So there is something to learn from, old ways of building, even from what is called architecture without architects. Until people rediscovered its unique value recently, Yakisuji was considered old-fashioned and its application had been declining despite its long history. Its origin is unknown, but one theory suggests that people in Kansai area, including Kyoto and Osaka, started using Yakisuji to strengthen the bottom of the ships hundreds or 1,000 years ago. Kansai area surrounds the Seto Naikai, the inland sea, which has always been the major maritime transportation channel for Japanese. Terunobu Fujimori is probably the one who unearthed Sujiban and elevated its aesthetic values. Fujimori tweaked traditionally Subitan ban by increasing the thickness of slabs from conventional about ½ an inch to an inch. It changes the impression quite significantly. With ½ an inch of thickness, it is more like cooking a beef steak. It's a wood plank with a nice brown touch on it. But when it's an inch thick, the surface will completely turn to charcoal and the underlying non-burnt proportion becomes invisible. It's just the preference. But Fujimori's version of Sujiban is really charcoal that exhibits a unique primitive strength. And here it is. And it is indeed, aesthetically inciting presence on a building. It is wood that became charcoal towards the outside. And yes, it's almost black, but being an organic material that is wood, even charcoal, is not oppressive. So coal house designed by Terunobu Fujimori as part of Sumika project, Sujiban is used to represent the ultimate primitive material for architecture, charcoal. The house is primitive avant-garde inside out. Now the chocolate house, and the chocolate it is, maybe too explicitly. What can we say? It is almost non-architecture or anti-architecture. It's a doll's house. It's a gingerbread house, chocolate house. But the world and life have room also for something like this. He's not one of my preferred architects, but I think it's important to also know his works. And he is our contemporary. Now he is an art museum from 1998, the Hamamatsu City Fuku Akino Art Museum. You see, he doesn't build only small buildings. He also builds some larger buildings using the same method of burning the wood that he borrowed from all the times. His total rejection of modernity as we understood it in its dogmatic manifestations is almost amazing. It seems not just this part of the building is employing that method of burning, but there seem to be some burning happening here too. Anyway, this patina, I think, offers originality to the building, and who knows if there are other virtues like protecting the material in some way, all for the better. But look at this strange structure here. This is surrealism, and today, as I said, is Magritte's birthday. Although his surrealism is very different from what we see here. This building looks like a fortress in a way, but I would express myself oxymoronically, a fragile fortress. Inside is, the typical museum with white walls and clean everything in order to hang paintings on the walls. Now a tea house from 2004. This is very whimsical, is it not? I mean, even in dreams, I personally wouldn't be able to imagine something like this. And I imagine most architects wouldn't do it. Well, not only he dreamt of it, he built it, as you can see. It is in a way amazing. Is it a bird's house? Perhaps, but it's made for a human being. Maybe two, I don't know if three, maybe two at the most. Anyway, we see there's someone, I don't know if it's him or not. I wonder, how would one feel in something like this? I see actually two people. In each window, there is one person. Bravo to them. And here is the architect himself inside the strange house. But again and again, I feel like taking my head off my head in front of the Japanese society and Japanese civilization and Japanese culture for allowing for experiments to happen. And maybe this is not even called an experiment. For the joy of building in a certain way, why not? Why not allow imagination to manifest itself even in this extravagant, eccentric way? In a way, it is very audacious what he did here. I mean, you look at this section, and it is audacious in its primitivism and naivete. The flying mud boat, this one is even more eccentric. I mean, it's a flying mud boat, literally. I mean, it's supported by or suspended with the help of 4 wires and nothing else. Is this for human beings? Yes, believe it or not. Look, a human being just like you and me and us is moving courageously towards this fragile thing suspended there. What's wrong with these Japanese? Nothing wrong with them. If it is something wrong, is with us who are unable to dream and to build the way they do. You know, there is a child in all of us. And if we encourage the child in all of us to manifest himself or herself, interesting and beautiful and sometimes provocative things come into being. I think we need such things. Why is it that they don't care about, you know, let's say security? And well, you know, when children climb in trees, you know, they don't think about such matters. And it seems the Japanese also allow for, you know, such activities to happen. If you ask me, I'm not sure I would be so open to climb on that ladder and go towards that narrow opening. But look, there are, you know, interested persons. This one we saw already. Now the name Monoki Art Museum, and it is a museum. I mean, a large building. He became well known now. He was well known in Japan. Now he's known, you know, everywhere because he was present at the Venice Biennial, and you know, he publishes books and so on. But he is a very interesting, indeed, eccentric architect. La Colina, Omi Hachiman. You know, the building almost blends with the landscape, with the green roof. Here is not green, it's during the construction. But anyway, again, the fact that Japan is so open-minded about, you know, practically they build anything. It's incredible. It looks like they don't have restrictions, they don't have codes, and it's a country with earthquakes and so on. But the freedom of expression is almost Sharia. Another museum, the Mosaic Tile Museum. This is strange. It is, and don't be fooled by this. You would say it has the roof covered with green. No, it's just a thin line of green, and it's not the whole roof covered like this. Look at this strange window door, and also the strangeness of the windows. You know, so small. But why not? I guess his you know, so-called working drawings are kind of like this. I would call this in many ways a very sustainable architecture. Even the drawing itself is sustainable. The Vatican Chapel, which was built at the Venice Biennial, and it's interesting, this one as well, in its you know, rough innocence. Look at the narrow door. I mean, it's probably, I mean, most surely it's not wider than 80 centimeters. It could even be 60 centimeters. it forces you to you know, go in almost uncomfortably. Maybe there is a certain meaning here that you don't, you know, access the house of God, you know, through a large glass automatic door. The interior is provocative too. Again, in its simplicity and naivete. If I regret anything, is the fact that trees were cut down in order to build it. I mean, do we need to continuously cut down trees? I personally think we need more trees now than maybe buildings. Terunobu Fujimori wraps non-traditional Japanese home in a gleaming zinc shell. This is a more so-called modernistic treatment of the facade compared to the burnt wood. But otherwise, the anatomy of the building is similar to what he did previously. The interior is cozy and rather traditional. Wood is wood, always noble and always having character. Seminar House Pavilion by Terunobu Fujimori, 12 of 12, completely as part of the Kingston's University degree show in 2016. The Seminar House Pavilion combines traditional craftsmanship found in British and Japanese culture. The students drew inspiration from their study abroad trip to Nagano and Tokyo, where they toured a variety of Japanese buildings from a 16th century timber castle to a self-built concrete house. Fujimori also gave talks on the Red School, a term he coined to describe a group of Japanese architects recognized for the handmade aspects of their buildings. You notice, you know, the polemical red, because we talk today a lot about green, green everything, and he polemically turns to its opposite, that is red. Now, this is a structure built by the students. You know, what can I say? It's not perhaps so much Japanese, but anyway, inspired in part by him. We have wood, we have zinc, we have even wood turned to charcoal at the top. They experiment. That's what they do. And it's good they experiment, but what is not good is that they cut down trees. I think we should abstain from cutting down trees for a while. And here are the proud builders. I mean, their legs and their shoes, their feet. So the influences here were coming not just from Japan, but also from Great Britain. And I end this rather short introduction into the work of this Japanese architect with a question mark. Cute architecture. Okay, and now because it's the birthday of Rene Magritte, I will say something about architecture and surrealism. I would show, okay, let me begin. Architecture and surrealism. I have a few other things to show relating to this theme, but I begin with this one. Architecture and surrealism, by the way of the birthday of Rene Magritte. This was the Belgian architect Rene Magritte, an important surrealist painter. Let's read about him. René François Ghislain Magritte, born on the 21st of November, 1898, and died in 1967, was a Belgian surrealist artist who became well known for creating a number of witty and thought-provoking images, often depicting ordinary objects in an unusual context. His work is known for challenging observers' preconditioned perceptions of reality. His imagery has influenced pop art, minimalist art, and conceptual art. This is actually not done by him, but is almost a pastiche. Well, maybe the word pastiche is not the proper one. It's based on his painting. Someone put a mask on the so-called face, because of the pandemic. This was by Magritte. He plays, sometimes not very innocently with indeed ambiguities, reversed figures. I think in essence, Rene Magritte is trying to sabotage the frontier between what we call reality and what we call non-reality or surreality. This was not done because of the pandemic. This was done before. He died in 1967, so he had nothing to do with the pandemic, but somehow for our time could have certain meanings relating to the pandemic. And now I'll show some architectural proposals of an artist, Onicio Gonzalez, which are considered by some to have, a surrealist aesthetic. I find them actually very skillfully done, and personally, I think such buildings could be built just as he envisioned them. It's not really surrealism here, but it's a play. It's a playfulness at work, which could somehow be associated with surrealism, but I don't think it's really surrealism. But I show them nevertheless because I think they show what an artist with imagination and skill can do without having the restrictions that dogmatic architecture places on us. After all, the structures of the Japanese architect that we just saw are more surreal in a way than what we look at here. This could very well be a built building. It's very buildable. And it can be, it can be used just like this or like this. Or like this even. Of course, only the one in the middle. Or like this. How would it be if we build a building without knowing what its purpose and function would be, and then try to live in? Although initially we would build it without having in mind a specific function. It's very possible. I mean, you can build this building just as it is, and then find your way through. If you need some adjustments, you can make them, and you can actually live very interestingly in this sort of structure. Remember, these were done not by an architect, but by an artist who was trained differently, and thus he didn't have the inhibitions that architects usually have. Okay, and now I'll show a work by a famous architecture office, an architecture group in the Netherlands, MVRDV. They built this work called The Imprint in Paradise City in Seoul, South Korea. And it is more fantastic than actually what we saw earlier. And it was built like this. Winnie Mas is a very innovative and provocative architect who is perhaps the main designer of the group, but this is an important architecture office in the Netherlands. And look what they built. This, in my opinion, is very close to what I might call surrealist architecture. Of course, you cannot build something like this with, with a T-square and a rectangle. It's impossible. I mean, how would you make this, entrance here? You have to have the technology of today. It's very free, but also very rigorous. These folds in the surface of the facade are impossible to do without having the appropriate technology at your disposal. Some might think this is stage design, it's not architecture. I wouldn't say so. Plus, stage design was and is associated with architecture. The relationship between architecture and theater always existed, to an extent at least. So MVRDV in South Korea. Well, many of these things here are decorative, of course, but ornaments or decorations were most of the time, if not all the time, connected with architecture. But the unusualness of the facade, because of the, this is almost like a fabric, a folded fabric. The facade of the building became in this way in the hands of these architects. It is an interesting architecture, although some might think it's not an architecture, but it is. Obviously, these are buildings. They are built and they do function. But you must be very open-minded to do something like this. And how can you achieve, how can you break new ground in the field of art if you are not open-minded? Even Einstein said that, for an idea which doesn't seem to be crazy at first, there is no hope. Bravo to them for being courageous, for experimenting, for trying new things. The truth is the frontier between what we call reality and what we call illusion. It's very narrow. Dream is part of life. So why not have an architecture that shows this? And these are architects who know how to build and build many buildings all over the world. But they continuously experiment. They continuously try new things. And as such, I think they are an example to follow. This is the project, of course. And now I will show you something that perhaps would make you a little bit uncomfortable because we are confronted with COVID. But I want to show you, I almost felt like calling this section of this presentation the wonderful world of viruses, because at least in 3D images, they are beautiful sometimes. And, you know, I don't know how science generates these images, but I find them, you know, aesthetically actually enticing. And yes, there is surrealism here too. I mean, these are pathological entities, realities, no, the viruses. But how come they look so interesting, structurally and otherwise? You know, it's indeed somehow the other side of malevolence, you know, there seems to be beauty even in what is, you know, unpleasant to think of. These are viruses, you know, 3D images of viruses. Here is, you know, the famous doctor from the United States with a COVID virus, a model of the COVID virus. This is also COVID. I don't know how they produce these images, you know, but they are described as being 3D images of viruses. This is also COVID. The complexity and the you know the amazing variety of nature, it never ceases to astonish. And since we talk about the surrealists today a little bit, I want to show you a few works by a very interesting woman surrealist painter, a lady, Remedios Varo. And I take this occasion to talk a little bit about her because we don't have too many women in the field of art or architecture, and it's important to show the creativity of women. And she was a remarkable artist, a surrealist painter. Remedios Varo, born in 1908 and died in 1963. So at 55, she died. She was born Maria de los Remedios Alicia Rodriga Varo y Uranga in Angles, a small town in the province of Girona in Catalonia, in northeast Spain in 1908. Her mother named her Varo in honor of the Virgin de los Remedios, the Virgin of Remedies, after a recently deceased older sister. Here she was, smoking, a truly remarkable painter, and we are going to see some of her works. Very poetical. And yes, it is surrealism, but I want to show them because I think architects should be aware of the world of plastic arts, of the world of painting, should be very well educated and should stir up their own imagination through such works. There are sometimes buildings or, medieval-like structures in her paintings. I think her poetic universe is very, interesting. I think she was obsessed by time. We see the clepsydra, the hourglass here, and there is a strange world in her paintings. But the strangeness is actually ours if we are unable to understand that life also has so-called surreal or strange things within it. And we must acknowledge them and we must express them. And it's very possible. We saw various architectures that did so, like the Japanese architect, then MVRDV. There are many other examples. In fact, today I will also show a few buildings by Ricardo Bofill and Taller de Arquitectura, also somehow inspired by Magritte, whose birthday is today. So again, the world of the dreams belongs to life in its very essence, actually. Here is the painter with two of her paintings behind her, Remedios Varo. A dreamer, of course. A dreamer of other worlds. You see, her surrealism is very different from the one of Rene Magritte. In a way, it's more complex, more lyrical, more narrative. Maybe she is looking at herself from that box. Remedios Varo. Interesting here how the shadows meet each other, almost meet each other, but not the real persons. They follow their own paths. It's a reflection on dualities and also on the difficulty to actually meet the other person halfway, so to speak. I hope I have here another painting of hers where we see the duality, real, unreal, or concrete reality and shadow. Here she is with a mask, you know, but the mask is also herself. You would say life is a dream, and in many ways it is. This is the painting I was referring to. You see, in this case, the shadow is upwards, is, appears to be real, and the so-called real person is actually becoming shadow. So, you know, again, the interchangeability between reality and unreality, between the concreteness of the real and the and the shadow. Here the shadow is up, the unreal, the so-called unreal is up, and the real becomes so-called unreal and horizontal. Okay, and now I will end this presentation today with a short presentation about, again, Magritte, because it's his birthday, and a few buildings by Taller de Arquitectura and Ricardo Bofill, also relating very much to architecture and surrealism. Ricardo Bofill, he's still alive, so he's contemporary. He must be over 80 now, but when he started to build together with Taller de Arquitectura, his architecture office in Catalonia near Barcelona, they built some incredible things. They said, I mean, Ricardo Bofill declared many years ago, for us, Magritte is more important than Mies. And we are going to see in one way. In what way? So Rene Magritte, again, we already saw an image of this painting. Then we see other images of Magritte's paintings. And again, for Taller de Arquitectura and Ricardo Bofill, in their words, Magritte was more important than Mies van der Rohe. And they were architects, and they are architects. But this is a painting by Magritte. Magritte again. Magritte. You see the dissolution of the real, you know, because that's not how one sees himself in the mirror. But he plays with what we expect, with our expectations, and betrays them. Inspired by his buildings, by his paintings, we could imagine an architecture that could be, possibly and hopefully more rich, more controversial, more provocative, more poetical. Magritte again. Now, why did Ricardo Bofill and Taller de Arquitectura say that for them Magritte was more important than Mies van der Rohe? Because Magritte opened the doors to imagination, to different kinds of visions about what life is, about what architecture is, and so on. Now we are going to see a few of their buildings, and this is really a short presentation. The cement factory studio, where actually they worked. Now, fortunately for them, Ricardo Bofill came from an affluent family. His father had a large successful business in constructions. So they took this cement factory and they transformed it into their own architectural studio. What a beautiful place to work in. Look at this. This was their architecture office in Barcelona. I mean, near Barcelona. It's surrealism itself. And should we add that Salvador Dali was also born around there, you know, also surrealism, not to speak about the surrealism of the architecture of Antoni Gaudí, also from Barcelona. So this is a cement factory that became the architecture studio of Taller de Arquitectura. Transformed, of course, by them. Courageously and with imagination, with a lot of imagination. Also, of course, with a lot of money, they afforded it. But, you know, there are other people who have the means, but they don't have the courage to assume the dreamlike part of life as they did then. So you see, the cement factory became has some parts which remind one of the paintings of Remedios Varo, don't they? And we are going to see also 2 or 3 buildings that they built not far away from this studio they created for themselves in this cement factory. Waldon 7, and a large complex of apartment buildings, very unusual blocks of flats. Look at them. And in the foreground, we see the cement factory where the studio was, right here. But they built this, you know, very interesting you know, complex of apartments. You know, let's call them blocks of flats. It's a, you know, it's an almost surreal citadel built by Taller de Arquitectura and Ricardo Bofill near Barcelona. This is what happens when you allow imagination to function and to express itself. There is the labyrinth, there are corridors, there are colors, it's a magical, you know, environment. This is how it looks from a drone, from above. La Muralla Roja, you know, again, you know, on the top of the building is a surreal environment. It's the red labyrinth. It's both civilized and romantic, because again the imagination of the architects who allow themselves to be more inspired by Magritte than by Mies van der Rohe. Again, a view from the air. So they built this, but they also built this one, Kafka's Castle, which is called Kafka's Castle, and we are going to see it. Strong colors, why not? Color is important to life. Why should we only have white walls? Why? So, by the way of Rene Magritte being born today, I thought of showing a few things, somehow relating to a more general theme, possibly called architecture and surrealism. To show the otherness of an architecture, which is possible when we get rid of conventions and dogmas and the expected. Perhaps we should have in our hearts and in our mind the motto of one of the most important schools of architecture today, SciArc in Los Angeles, which goes like this: to hell with rules and regulations, we are going for the unknown. And these people were going for the unknown, just like the Japanese architect whose birthday is today, and just like Remedios Varo, and just like Rene Magritte. Taller de Arquitectura and Ricardo Bofill also explore new territories. In good measure, dreamlike. Thank you.